discovered gold on Sutter's land in California. The poor bastard lost everything. Trying to keep 49ers off his land was like trying to keep fleas off an old dog. How many? 4 that I saw. Recognize any of them? Nope. Talk to them? Henry shook his head. I was thinking about running them off, but then I recalled what you've been saying about me staying clear of law problems, so I came back for you. Well, that was damn thoughtful, partner. Caleb pulled his saddle off the fence and swung it up onto Pirate's back. The buckskin had been watching and listening, and Caleb was certain he already knew they were heading out. Glad you were able to keep in mind that this ranch will require the both of us. Caleb and Henry rode south across the grass-covered valley for over an hour, then turned east and moved up into forested foothills. Ahead of them, the long, rugged ridge rose above the tall pines, forming the boundary between the ranch and land belonging to Frank Stubbs, their neighbor. Beyond the ridgeline, the Stubbs claim consisted of large areas of forest and open range, but their neighbor was only interested in the precious minerals that could be carved from the earth. Caleb had already had a few brushes with Frank Stubbs, and knew him to be a tough, grasping, miserable bastard, a hard drinker with a penchant for bullying anyone he saw as somehow beneath him. The property border was clear, however, and good ridge lines made good neighbors, more or less. When the two partners reached a ravine that led roughly southwest, they followed a creek that twisted and tumbled toward the valley lowland. Caleb's plan was to approach the trespassers from above. He knew the terrain. He'd been hunting here since he'd picked up the papers at the land office in Elkhorn back in January. He knew where the groves of cottonwood and aspen had fought to establish their space amongst the pines and other evergreens. He knew every ravine and wash and gully, every mountain spring and creek, the ponds and small lakes formed by the lay of the land and the industry of beavers, the rocky bluffs and ledges where cougars and bears found shelter, the grassy meadows dotted with wildflowers in spring, now yellow as autumn encroached. Soon it would all be covered by the deep snows of the long mountain winter. We're getting close, Henry told him when they reined in at the edge of the creek. The stream here was wide and shallow, with round gleaming stones protruding from the surface of the rippling water. I saw him where the gully broadens out by the pond just before it drops over the waterfall. Caleb nodded. Sure as hell, these fellas had to be panning for gold. Not 3 miles north of their ranch, miners were busily digging silver out of the hills that ringed Elkhorn, but he'd heard some talk of gold occasionally showing up as well. He looked back at the ridge and then gestured downward at the muddy edge of the creek. Hoof prints. Guess those will be our boys, Henry said. Yup. From the look of things, these fellas came down onto our land from the ridge. From Frank Stubbs's land. They are fortunate men. If Stubbs spotted these knotheads on his side, he'd already have their carcasses nailed to his barn door. Henry grinned. If you ever finished that barn, we'd have a door to nail 'em up on. Giving him a look, Caleb nudged his buckskin forward, but they hadn't even crossed the stream when 2 gunshots rang out. Immediately, Henry had his rifle out of its scabbard and looked around. A revolver, a quarter-mile that way, Caleb said. Maybe our trespassers decided to shoot one another. That'd save us some work. Too much to hope for. The 2 men dismounted on the other side of the creek, tied their animals, and approached on foot. The forest floor was a carpet of pine needles, and they moved through the forest silently. The land began to drop off, and it wasn't long before the sound of voices reached them, along with the smells of a dying campfire and burnt coffee. When they reached a ridge at the top of the wide gully, Caleb signaled to his partner. They moved past a grove of cottonwood trees until they reached a small rise that afforded them a good view. They were 80 yards from the edge of a pond below. In front of them, the terrain dropped off steeply. The sun was still high overhead. Between their vantage point and the water, the grassy hillside was dotted with boulders and brush. Lying on their bellies, they peered down into the gully. Below them, in a clearing on the near side of the wide creek, a slovenly camp had been thrown together. A few tarps had been hung over lines stretched between yellow-leafed cottonwood trees. Saddles and bedrolls lay beneath them. Smoke from a smoldering fire hung like a cloud over